Now that I've created my user interface, I need to actually add the code to my buttons to allow my calculator to function. Now the numbers, the idea is that when the user clicks on a number, it will add that number into the text box. But I don't want it to overwrite it, so if I click 1, it puts 1 in, and then 2 gets rid of the 1 and puts 2 in its place. I want them to be able to click on the buttons and it adds it onto the end of what's already in there. That's called concatenation. So that's what I want to do. So I'm going to start with the number 1, so double click on that. VB then puts in this line for me. So what I want to do is to add to the text box. The text box is called TXT display, so I'm just click on that. It's the contents of the text box I want to change, which is its text property, and I want that to equal, and I've got to make it equal itself, so whatever was in there previously and the number 1. So I need to put the number 1 in quotes like that. So what that means is whatever was already in the text box, add the number 1 onto the end of it. So that's concatenation. So I'm just going to test to see if that works. So if I click on the 1, you can see it adds a 1 to the text box and it adds 1s onto the end each time without overwriting them. So now I need to do the same thing for the number 2, so I need to go back to my user interface, double click on the number 2 button to allow VB to put in the text. Now rather than type that out again, I'm just going to highlight it, Control C to copy it, Control V to paste it, and I'm going to change that to the number 2. And again, to do the number 3, I have to go back to the user interface, double click on the button, copy that line, and edit that to say number 3. I'm just going to test it again, make sure it's all working correctly. So 1, 2, 3, yep, you can see that happily is adding all those numbers. So I'm just going to pause the video now while I complete the rest of the numbers. Now remember, you can pause the video anytime you like to carry on the tasks. So now you can see I've added all the numbers up to 0, so I need to make sure that that's working correctly. So again, I need to test it. Well, we know 1, 2, 3 works, 4, 5, 6 works, 7, 8, 9 and 0. So you can see that all the buttons work correctly. So the next thing is to code the clear button. Now the clear button is just going to clear whatever's in the text box, blank it out. So I just need to double click on the clear button and I need to change the text that's displayed. So it's the text box, it's the text property. Now to clear it, I just send it an empty string, so that's quote marks with nothing in the middle. So we test that and see how that works. So I put my numbers in and then clear, and you can see that clears the text box. Perfect. The next step is to code my plus, minus, times, divide buttons. And what the way they work is that the user is going to enter a number. They're then going to click on a symbol. They're going to enter a second number and click on equals. So my program is going to need to store those values. So it's going to need to store the number 1, the number 2. It's going to also need to store which symbol they clicked on, because we don't know, and it's going to need to store the result. So I'm going to need some variables. Now because I've got lots of different buttons, those variables are going to need to be available in all of my buttons. That means they need to be global variables. So I'm just going to double click on my plus button. That's going to put the code in here, but I'm not going to declare my variables in the button because they would only be available in that button. Instead, I'm going to come up to the top of my code, and in front of all the buttons I'm going to need to declare my variables here. Now I need 2 variables for the numbers, so I'm going to call those dim, and I'm going to use just whole numbers to start off with, just to keep my calculator simple. So I'm going to have number 1 comma number 2, and I'm going to declare those as integer. A little bit later on we'll turn them into fractional numbers and make the calculator more sophisticated, but for the moment I'm just going to keep it nice and simple. I also need to store the result, so I'm going to declare a variable to store the result. And because we are dividing 2 numbers, if you divide numbers you may not get a whole number as a result, so that needs to be declared as a single, and that will allow me to store fractional numbers. Now I also need to store whichever operator they've selected, so I need to declare a variable for that. So I can't call it operator because that's a key word, so I'm going to call it symbol, and that's a string because it's not a number. So I press that enter there, and there you can see my 3 variables, and they are global variables, so they'll be available throughout the program. So if I go back to my add button down here, now what I want to do is when they click on the plus sign, it needs to pick up whatever number they've entered, save that number as number 1, clear the text box ready for the next number, and save the symbol. Now if they click on the add button without entering a number, it's going to make my program crash. So I just want to add a little bit of error trapping to stop that happening. So I'm going to say if the text box txtdisplay.text, so if that's empty, and remember we can check to see if something's empty with an empty string, then so what I'm saying is if the text box is empty, then I want to output an error message to tell them they've got to enter a number. I'm going to use a message box for that. So I'm going to pick up a message box, .show, and I want to say please enter a number. Okay, that's just going to make my program a little better, make sure it doesn't crash. Now if they've entered a number, so else, if they did enter a number, then I want to pick up that number. So I want number 1 equals whatever was in the text box, txtdisplay.text. And because it's locked and they can only enter the numbers via the keypad, it's going to be a number. So if number 1 equals txtdisplay, then I want to clear the text box ready for the second number. So I want to make that equal to an empty string to clear it ready, and I also want to store the symbol. So symbol in this instance is a plus sign there. So that's the code for my add button. If the text box is empty, output an error message, else pick up the number, clear the text box, and remember which symbol they clicked on. So now I need to code my other buttons. So if I click on my minus button, rather than type that out again, I'm just going to highlight it, Control C to copy it, Control V to paste it. I just need to change the symbol from a plus to a minus. Repeat that with the multiplication button, and change the symbol to an asterisk, and repeat that for my divide button. Change the symbol to a divide, and oh no, not my equals button. Right, so now I've coded those 4 buttons. Now I need to code the equals button, and this is the much trickier bit. So the idea is they put the first number in, click on the symbol, put the second number in, and then click on the equals button. So the first thing the equals button needs to do is to check to see whether it's empty again. So I'm just going to copy that bit of code, just that bit there. It doesn't like it because I haven't got an end if, so I'm just going to put in an end if. It put it in last time for me, but because I copied and pasted it, it didn't like that. So if the display is empty, then I'm going to tell them to enter a message, an error message. Else, so if it wasn't empty, I want to see which symbol it was. So else if, I'm going to use an else if the button wasn't empty, then else, if it wasn't empty, I need to pick up my second number. So number 2 equals whatever was in the text box, txtdisplay.text. So I pick up my second number. Now I need to work out what symbol they entered. So if the symbol equals a plus sign, then I want to add my 2 numbers. So the result will equal number 1 plus number 2. Else, if my symbol was a minus sign, then I want to take away my 2 numbers. So the result equals number 1 minus number 2. Else, if my symbol was a asterisk, then I want to multiply my two numbers. Result equals number 1 times number 2. Else, if the symbol equals divide, then I want to divide the numbers. Result equals number 1 divided by number 2. There. Okay. So now what I want to do is I've worked out the result, but I haven't displayed it yet. Now I don't want to display the result if that one was empty, so it needs to come before that end if. If I click on the if, the else, and the end if, it shows me which ones belong together. So in front of that, here, I need to display my result in the text box. So I want to make the txt display dot text equals result. So that will output the result to the text box. So now all I need to do is to check to see if it works. This is the big moment. So I click on the play button, enter my first number. 12 plus 6 equals 18. Well, good so far. Clear. Let's have 15 take away 3 equals 12. Very good. I'm going to have 5 times 8 equals 40. Perfect. 12 divided by 3 equals 4. I just check that I get fractional values, so I could say, let's say 20 divided by 3, that's not a whole number, equals 6.66, so that's good. And I'm going to clear that. So that's looking very, very good. Now I can check to see whether my error trapping works. So if I click on the plus sign without entering a number, then it gives me an error message, and the minus, and the times, and the divide. So that all works. So let's enter a number, choose the symbol, and then click on equals without entering a number, and that works. So it's looking good so far. I mean, it's not perfect. There is still more error trapping I could put in. But for now, I'm happy with my calculator.